My name is Art Payne. I'm with Mantech. I'm an executive director in our defense sector, supporting national security programs. We're a proud sponsor here at TechNet. I'd like to introduce Ms. Caroline Kuharski. She's the Chief Data Officer who will moderate today's session, Operationalize Data to Gain the High Ground. In her role, Ms. Kuharski leads a culture of embraces a robust programmatic approach to data management. Her role identifies, prioritizes, and executes data and analytic initiatives aligned to DISA's enterprise strategies and business outcomes. Please welcome Ms. Caroline Kuharski.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, good afternoon. Happy day 2 of AFCEA. Everybody who's still alive and standing and was able to make it through the day. Thank you for the introduction, Art. So Caroline Kuharski, Chief Data Officer here at DISA. Really excited about this role in this office that is not as new as the J2, which we'll get into, but still a fairly new office within the agency. We're coming up on our 3 years of being a real program office within DISA, and finalizing the end of our first DISA data strategy. So there's a lot of firsts, which is a good thing. Scary, but still a good thing. So I'll go ahead and make sure I get the titles right. On the panel today, we do not have Lieutenant Colonel Calder. We have Colonel Richard Leach, thank you. And he is the director of our new J2 Intelligence Directorate. All right, awesome. Just make sure I got that right. And then beside him, we have Steve Fernandez. He is a data scientist within the Chief Data Office at DISA. And then beside him, we have Mr. Romin Rodriguez. He is our data management chief within the Chief Data Office. And then we also have Dave McCarthy, who is the chief of the Defensive Cyber Operations. And that resides in the J357, correct? Excellent. And then Mr. Daryl Fountain, he is the chief of the Cybersecurity Service Provider Operations, so the CSSP chief. So we got security, we got operations, we got intel, and then we got data, scientists, me, all talking about operationalizing data. So as we all know, right, data is one of the most valuable assets that you can democratize. Foundation, your infrastructure is really important, but all the data that rides on there, that's what you're really going to pull value and be able to make your decisions off of. So operationalizing the data, it really means to transfer the raw data into actionable information so that senior leaders, those in the foxhole, those across the world are able to make those actionable decisions. One of the very first things that we like to think about whenever it comes to our data is how is it being used? Who's going to use it? And then we start to really build our programs and build our mission needs around those problem statements. We want to make sure that the data that we're curating, that we're providing is useful. And it's the programs, it's the infrastructure, it's how we disseminate it that makes it successful. So successful examples of data-driven missions, they really highlight having that clear definement, and working with our end users and our mission partners is the first thing that we have to do there. Data governance is another cornerstone of operationalizing data. While we all like to talk about the fun, bingo buzzwords of AI and ML and all these fun, shiny tools, if you don't have quality data and governance around that data, you're not going to be able to use it to its full effectiveness. So as we're talking about operationalizing, it's not just the technology or the capabilities behind it, but it's the governance when it comes to policies, standards, and just rules around that data for use. So we continuously evaluate and refine our governance structures and framework so that we are evolving not just with the technology, but the data and the mission partner needs of that data. So in a defense environment, we get structured, unstructured data. So the way that we provide, governance around that, it's going to be a little different. And the way that we operationalize satellite images or, sensor data is going to be different. But that's where partnering with industry and learning and evolving as we go, that's how we are really able to put the appropriate measures of capabilities to use that data so that our mission partners around the globe are able to. So finally, leveraging the right technologies is crucial. Advanced analytics, within our Chief Data Office, that is something that is going to be very much a focal item for us, beginning especially in 2025. 2024, 2023, 2022, we really focused on finding our data. What do we even have? What repositories are out there? What kind of searches do we have? Now that we know and we have a better handle of what data is where, how do we use it? How can we analyze it? How can we pull all that value out of that asset? So, excuse me. So in the Chief Data Office right now, we are bringing a data lab for DISA to use so that we can really empower the workforce to bring their data, put it in the lab, break it, apply different levels of analytics to that so that they can take it into production and use it more efficiently. So with that, I'll go ahead and start with a few questions for our panel. And I'm actually going to sit down and ask the questions just so we have like a conversation. But Colonel Leach, I'll start with you. So what are some specific mission requirements that the J2 has whenever it comes to data that you receive or data that you need?
So I think, are we on?
I think so.
Okay. So I think one of the big things is, from my perspective at Intel, is timely, is actionable. We're pulling in network data from across a large IT domain that Dave and Daryl help manage as well. But I need to take that data information, that network information, and now turn it into intelligence. So from that perspective is understanding the operational environments, understanding how the threat operates in those environments, and really being able to consolidate all that data to where I can, put analysts on that database that the information is searchable, is relevant. Those analysts can then work with the other data scientists to understand is like, hey, from what we're seeing and what this is now going to get enriched with from national intelligence, how do we now put that together? It's got to be in a location that, one, is searchable, it's shareable, it doesn't get constrained by a lot of the challenges I have on the national intelligence side, because from the standpoint, with all the data we have access to, it's making sure that we can share it. It's making sure that I can take all that data and turn it into something, turn it into intelligence that I can share with Dave, share with anybody on this panel, share with industry that says, I have a problem. Here's now what we've determined based upon what the data is telling us, and I can turn it back over to you guys to say, help me solve this problem. So those are some of the big requirements, because quite honestly, a lot of times with my community, I'm waiting too long. Mm-hmm. I don't have the time to wait on this battlefield, on this domain, for 2 to 3 weeks or 2 to 3 months to turn an Intel product around. I need to be able to have us having a data repository, data tools, to be able to put my analysts on and have them turn things faster, quicker, and with reliability to share with our partners. So I can basically give an answer to the director or give an answer to one of the PEOs in the acquisition side, so we can shape the acquisitions strategies to ensure that the threat is not already in the program before we even launch it.
That's a really good point. I mean, not only is it data sharing, but it's having the technology behind it to allow the data to be shared. Because if you say boat and I say ship, we need to be able to say, oh, that's a vessel, right? So data normalization, tagging, and definement of the data, that's another core focus of us, within DISA. The quality of the data is 100% a focal point, and we actually have a data catalog now within DISA that is doing data quality assessments so that we can say, hey, you need to do the metadata requirement tagging. You're not doing that in your data. You need to do that, and if you don't, then you're going to have a bad data quality score, and the data is not going to be used as efficiently as possible. So, over to Romeen. So how do you currently manage data governance, and what policies or frameworks are in place to ensure data security, integrity, and accessibility?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Well, thank you for that, Carolyn. Good question. The first thing I want to say is data governance inside DISA is a partnership. It's not like all the data resides in my repository under my control. So the partnership starts with establishing, the CDO established a data governance council. Mm-hmm. And that data governance council is comprised of SMEs from across the agency. And what those SMEs represent their specific organization, their specific missions. And they come to this council and they present those up to the Chief Data Office and across the agency, right? Because part of the mission of the Chief Data Council, the Data Governance Council, part of the mission of the Data Governance Council is to have dialogue around the policies, requirements, and the needs of all the different missions within DISA. In addition to that, what we also do as a part of our governance is to review the mission requirements of other groups within DISA. So we have what we put out. We produce policies, we produce documentation. We have those that come from within the greater DoD. But there are also needs that are identified by Mr. Fountain's team or Mr. McCarthy's team, and those policies need to be reviewed and considered at the agency level. And that's part of the main purpose of the main difference between how governance was done inside of a silo or inside of a vertical space before the establishment of the Chief Data Office. We operate above the silo. We operate across the agency, and we represent data governance from an agency standpoint. So the establishment of the the Data Governance Council was the key step towards managing and establishing governance around DISA's data at an agency level.
Yeah. I think we started with just a handful of people in that Data Governance Council. Now we have, it's like 116 or something like that.
Yes, we have about 160 members, but we have about 80 voting members.
Yep.
And voting is important because we want to make sure that everything that is being considered as a part of the Governance Council has input from across the agency.
And prior to that council, nobody was really talking about what should we be doing with our data? How should we be sharing it? What are some standards that we should be holding ourselves accountable to? While it was done in pockets, don't get me wrong, it wasn't at that agency level, that higher level to where we're able to not only apply things together as an agency, but also talk to our mission partners about what they're doing so we can have that consistency whenever we have information sharing. So Daryl, when it comes to combining data from multiple sources, what is your integration strategy and how do you ensure quality and consistency of that data coming from multiple sources?
So, again, as part of the operations group in the J357, I mean, we're at the pointy edge of the spear and we're the data consumers. Mm-hmm. And so we were looking at ways to build a collaborative DCO environment that facilitates that sharing through TTPs that work, that have considered the data catalog, that have looked at the work and the foundation that's been laid. We want to use those TTPs in the cyber operational environment then to build on what we would consider the defender's advantage. We know our terrain and the keys to that kingdom are in fact the defensive data, or as we've said in other things, all the data that the agency has. It has some security relevant data that's generated specifically. It has in general operational data that defines our operational environment. And this includes the cloud. We've now moved significant programs to the cloud environment. We're drawing on security relevant data generated by the cloud. That has to be sifted, sorted, maintained, normalized, just like the rest of our data, and we have less control over that. As we leverage an AWS service that doesn't look like an Azure service, it's not quite like a Google Cloud Platform service, which is totally different than an Oracle Cloud Infrastructure service. We have to bring those together in a way that we can dump them all into this pile of data that we're using to manage to success to find bad guys on the network. It all starts with a disciplined management of those data elements. In a way, they're never all going to be the same. You have to come to that recognition, but by being disciplined in how you deal with them, you can come up with ways to mitigate the differences and then use the catalog, use what we've worked on to get us to a better place to be able to find bad guys in the heat of battle. So we think that process and leveraging the good work that the CDO has done is going to take us a long way to get to that process, and we're already seeing some benefits of that as the discipline imposed on the agency by the CDO's efforts begins to pay off, because there's trade-offs. There's trade-offs across the organization. Nobody wants to pay for a little extra effort that gets my data in the catalog and characterized correctly, because the PM doesn't derive immediate benefit himself from that. Mm-hmm. I do as a consumer, but the PM doesn't. So I have to bring Caroline, the hammer, Kaharski, to bear on that problem set. But the agency has vested in her the ability to bring people together and say, hey, there's a reason for you to go the extra mile to do that, because our defensive efforts depend on that. So we're working closely. We're involved in a catalog right from the beginning, and we're continuing to stay involved with them, writing complementary papers and stuff. Absolutely. To contribute to that through the OMB guidance and the executive orders that have been published in our corner of the world and DCO discipline to augment that, to make sure it's consistent, again, and disciplined in execution.
Yeah, data governance, it's 1,000% necessary, but not everybody wants to actually do it. Because number one, like you were saying, it is a level of effort, and it's not instant gratification. So whenever we're really applying a lot of these data governance parameters, here within the agency, people do not like more rules. They do not like more work, and we get it. That's fine. But in 2 to 3 years, whenever we know exactly what's where, we've reduced redundancy within our repositories. We are having high data quality scores and authoritative data sources that we don't have to take 4 days to find a piece of information, or 5 days to find a person who owns that data source. That's where we're going to get that true value. I mean, I say 2 to 3 years, but I know it's actually today that we're able to do that. So Dave, how do you measure the effectiveness of data utilization? I just told Dave.
Thanks, Caroline.
Sorry.
So first of all, to measure effectiveness or performance, right, you have to have a standard that you're measuring it against, right? So generally, you have the mission requirements. In this case, what do we want to accomplish, or what capabilities should exist? And then a business problem. And then the data has to either A, enable that well, or not well, or not at all. And sometimes that is just a function of what's being collected at data retrieval or passed on to wherever it's going next. It may exist already and it just isn't coming through, right? But you can break down utilization metrics into a couple, right? You have the basic metrics, which are often overlooked because they're so basic, and usually they're captured on the back end, but when you come in as an end user, you don't necessarily see it, and they're very valuable. Basic ones like, number of users, you can set thresholds as to, we need this many users or want this many users by this time frame, and we're either tracking over the time series to obtain that or we're not, right? How often is this data being interfaced with? If it's not being interfaced with much, that means it's probably not being used. This data may be interfaced with a lot more, so now you can evaluate, is this data better than this data? Is it more appropriate for this use case? Things like that, and you're prompting that conversation, which starts to go into data governance. So basically the who, what, when, and where of just accessing the data, right? Then you have some of the more cool, shiny use cases, how many or what dashboards have been able to reference this data and answer these problems that you established exist early on, right? So if you're able to meet the mission requirement and tell leadership or someone on the ground what they need to know with these dashboards, that means the data is probably good. You can always change the technology, different tools, but you can't necessarily change the data as easily. And then other things like just satisfaction, reviews. Generally, you want to put that on paper instead of word of mouth. So if I'm going to the data catalog and I see that there's 5 data sets around threats, I can look at the reviews comments to see what DISA has to say about them. I'm not a domain expert in that area, so it's helpful to have that guidance, and it's just something so simple. And then there's other things that are more indirect, right? And again, it all comes back to data governance, but things like data maturity, right? DISA is in the process of developing a data maturity model, and that will allow us to really measure the maturity of different DISA organizations over time. And now you have these standards that are associated with, the top tier level of performance within a category, and this assessment measures how that changes over time. So the goal is obviously to improve, and you can see how the organization is utilizing data or has the framework in place to utilize it correctly with that assessment. So more indirect on that. And then other things like context about data, right? You have this data. I mentioned earlier that the data may have attributes or elements that exist, but they're not getting passed on, but in a lot of cases they may not. And we start to delve into metadata or information about data. So even in the catalog now, we have several different data entities ranging from an IT system to an asset, a person, for example. And does this information about those entities support operationalizing data? And you can break that down to, well, we expect this much information as a standard. An entity should have this much information, but it only has this much. So now you have a coverage ratio, if you will. But I'll leave it there because I could probably go on for 20 minutes.
Yeah, well, save it because I think we still have quite a bit of time left too. But so Dave, kind of the same question to you as well. DCO data is one of the top, I say, information domains. We always get asked for, hey, can I get DCO data? And it's like, okay, so but what data do you actually need? So measuring the effectiveness of DCO data, what is your strategy there, or how is your organization doing that?
So one of the primary things that we've done is created what we call visualization maps. So we've taken, if anyone is familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK framework, we've aligned all of the data sources against those T codes in a qualitative assessment in each one, and then we're able to tell where we have excellent, what we call visibility, and where we have a blind spot. Then we can go to the PMs and say, we need to cover down on this blind spot, or we know we're good to go, right? Or we think we're good to go at least. And for your panel earlier, perceived security, the guy said. But that's how we do it. And then of course, that gives us an idea of what data we have available to us and how we can use it and where we can focus. Then what we can do from there is we can develop custom analytics for what we're looking for to discover whatever we're looking to discover, and then from there respond appropriately. As for effectiveness, I don't know that meets the traditional meaning of effectiveness, but it shows how well we are covering down on our mission space or where we have gaps. And that, in a nutshell, is one of the primary. Then, of course, we got CMRS and, we got all these other tools.
Yeah, all the other fun stuff.
But I think that's the cleanest example of how we do it.
No, spot on. I mean, so whenever we have our cyber, analysts out there looking at the cyber landscape, if we don't know what's where we have those gaps based off of the data that we're using, that's a problem right there.
That's right. And what that exercise does is allows us to trace anomalies, we'll say, through the network to see if they're an incident or an event or what they are, and be able to compare and correlate data. So we break up logically from tier 0 outside of our boundary, things coming in tier 1 at the boundary, or tier 2 in the middle, tier 3 at the endpoint. And we can correlate and trace based on the data that's available to us quite effectively, the path that datum, I guess, packet, whatever you want to call it, has taken.
Yeah.
And then we can evaluate, was that legitimate, malicious, expected, unexpected? Do we need to look further? Do we need to respond? And that's kind of how we do it.
So Colonel Leach, over to you for a second. So whenever it comes to that integration of data, I know we talked about it a little earlier, right? So what are some data integration challenges that you currently see, not just within DISA, but kind of as a whole? And what are your thoughts on how we mitigate that?
So some of the things I'm doing with respect to the J2 is I'm going across I'm basically creating portfolios, data portfolios for all of the different PEOs, the JDERs, and the different centers. And the strategy is through those Intel requirement portfolios, I'm getting and understanding more of what the data is that those program offices are using, and then I can go back to the IC, or I can work with Dave, or work with our other CTI providers or other Intel providers to say, okay, here's what I understand now about our data. Here's what I now understand about our environment, how our networks work, and being able to use that data to help craft collection, to help craft understanding of the intel that we actually need to get ahead of the adversary. In kind of going back to the effectiveness of it is, I judge my effectiveness of I am able to get actionable intel to give to Dave and to Daryl to be able to get ahead of the threat before they're in the networks. It's to say, give them a warning, hey, heads up, you got something inbound, and here's what it looks like, here's how it's going to operate, here's how it's going to maneuver on the networks. So they're prepared at the boundary and behind, maybe even behind the boundary in case it actually does get through. So they're in a position to be prepared to address the adversary as they approach our boundary and if they get through the boundary, rather than later on the fact that, oh, hey, it's been 4 months, we just found out that the adversary's been in the network, now we have to do an incident response. So my effectiveness is they don't have to do an incident response because I'm feeding the intel to the DCO and the CSSPs to prevent the adversary from actually getting into the network. So that's the use of the data, turning that data into intelligence that is useful for the team. And then, from the acquisition side, is getting, like I mentioned before, is utilizing that to be able to create data strategies for acquisitions, so they understand what the adversary is doing in that data space as well.
Yeah. So, Romeen and Steve, you guys might want to tag team on this one. So going back to data governance.
Yes, ma'am.
Right? So while we're putting a lot of memos out there and we're putting a lot of rules and things like that, where do you think, with our data governance practices, where do you think we should be improving, not just within DISA, but DoD at large?
I'll take that.
Okay.
You got it?
Sure. First thing that comes to mind is just information going stale, right? Especially when you have information that may exist somewhere, it may not. So if it doesn't exist somewhere, someone's either creating it or they're bringing it together. And sometimes that's manual, a lot of times it's manual. So replicating that consistently throughout time is painstaking. It doesn't make sense usually. So making sure that that information can be automated, if you will, or at least done in a way that's consistent, preferably code, no code, whatever it is. And that way you have it, that information is reliable, right? The worst thing that can happen is obviously no information is reliable because it's stale. The next worst thing is that you have 20% of the information is not reliable, then 80% isn't. So now when you go report on it, you always have an asterisk that says, well, this information is up to date, but this isn't. So your analytics go out the window, right? So I think that's probably the first thing that comes to mind is just maintaining consistency of the data collection so you can just keep that continuous flow going.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, so if if data governance was static, I'd be out of a job in a year. So, luckily for us, data governance is cyclical in nature. We're constantly looking for ways to improve, and the best way we can improve is similar to saying the best tool is the one you have access to. So how we can improve in a lot of ways is to better utilize the tools that we have. So we can do things like data tagging. That's a big one. We can start we can improve our governance by improving things like API or usage or discovery, things like that. So those are a couple of the things that we can do. Communication is big, making sure that we continuously work to share information across the board. And then letting your needs be known, not just in a silo, because that's one of the things that we're big on in DoD, right? Having siloed information and then treating our needs as silos. So having that dialogue with your chief data office, right, about your data needs and your data governance needs, and having that bidirectional communication does help to improve our governance standards and our governance effectiveness. And then we can implement things within our governance structures, right? Inside DoD, we have established chains of commands. We have established governance boards. And one of those things our group has taken action on is to implement what we call a data readiness score, right? So, and that's integrated in one of our governance boards. And that gives existing programs an opportunity and new programs an opportunity to evaluate how ready their data is for their specific use. So going back to it, data management and data governance is cyclical in nature, and it's teamwork moving forward.
Well, I mean, it's always evolving with the change of our information, with the change of our digital landscape, right? So you're 100% correct. We're never going to be able to just put out one policy and say, okay, data governance is done. All right, we're good to go. Yeah, I'd be out of a job too, and that's not going to work out yet. One more question, and then we can open it up to you guys, and then open up to the floor for questions as well. And Dave, Daryl, I don't know if you guys want to tag team on this as well, right? So whenever it comes to security and the DCO data, what do you guys find are your challenges with the use and the sharing of that data?
You want to take it?
Sure. I've been itching to talk about my distinguished colleague Steve over here. Itching. You know, I warned him up front. I'm just going to tell everybody. I warned him up front that we were going to come out swinging. So, what's important to the data management, you know, is really the marriage of the data scientist guys with the analyst team. Now, who here's married? Yeah. I'm just going to tell you, there's a little put and take there. And there's a little put and take between data scientists and cyber analysts. Because Steve talked about data going stale. Who gets to determine what stale is? Mm-hmm. Hey, I haven't used that data. I haven't used it in 250 days. That stuff's old, kick it out. What's the average time, the mean time to detect an industry for an incident? 270 days. That's the mean. I mean, some are much, much longer than that. So determining that time when it's stale is going to be tough. Mm-hmm. I've been married for 40 years. 40 years. And it wasn't all marital bliss. My wife, she is Mrs. Clean. And if you go upstairs in the corner of my house, I have a little sanctuary called my office. I got magazines from 20 years ago. I got dust. My wife comes in there and I say, hey, you can have the other 2,500 feet of the house. This 300's mine. Stay out. And sometimes I feel like that's how my data scientist friends and I get along, because he's got a set of rules. He's trying to impose discipline on my room in the house. This DCO stuff's messy. It's messy. And he's trying to impose rule, because with that discipline, we glean some advantage. But it's uncomfortable because I'm a cyber warrior, man. I'm a cyber hero. I'm saving the Department of Defense here, and he's getting in my way. So this is tough business. And we continue to go back and forth and try to adjudicate those rules so that we can get, because the key challenge to operationalizing this data is manage it in an effective, consistent way. Again, us analyst dudes, I want it all. I would really like to know what was happening in 1957 on that network. I mean, it's really important to me. I would like to know what was happening a year ago, but that's not necessarily affordable. So we have to use the analytic techniques that a scientist brings to the table that me, the cyber defender guy, don't know about, to help find a middle road. And those metrics are really, really important, because just because I haven't used something doesn't mean it's not important, but I gotta work my way through that. And at the end of the day, we have to both work together and then turn that into a policy that's executable. So marriage, kind of tough. I'm working it out with Steve. We're going to get there, but it can be a tough road to drive down, but we think a valuable one nonetheless. And so we're doing our piece to try to do there, and we're disappointed some days, but other days it's marital bliss. Not as many, but still a little bliss. All right.
I think what he just described is one of the biggest challenges of data governance, actually, right? So especially in a big enterprise like DISA, you have different domains. You have cyber, you have HR even. In trying to standardize the way that these organizations operate when it comes to their data, so standards, policies, requirements, it's very hard, next to impossible, to standardize an entire agency level best practice, for lack of a better word, and it meets the needs of all of the different domains and all of the organizations within DISA. So that's probably the biggest problem. If anyone has an answer, please meet up with me after. But
just stay focused on DCO data, and we'll be good to go. Those other guys, they're all B team guys.
Okay. Well, that was all of my questions. Did any other comments, or you guys want to jump in or anything?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but so talking about, so how Steve asked if anyone has the answer, I think our group has the answer, right? Caroline's office, to be more precise. But how we manage to make effective policies for the agency and each group is you write the larger policy up top across, and you make it with enough wiggle room for it to be then operationalized within the organizational need of the specific org, right? So that's part of the beauty of the Data Governance Council, is to have that agency view and that agency conversation within the Governance Council, but then to go back and work with each group to then have their specific policies brought up to the CDO level, and then be written to meet their need, but have the consideration of the broader agency in its development is critical to how we are going to partner as the CDO with each organization inside DISA.
So the defender's advantage, again, is knowing his terrain. I allegedly know the AO DISA terrain. And we have to be disciplined, directed, informed, and implement good policy. Got to be disciplined, which Carolyn is going to help me with. Again, that's Carolyn, the Hammer Kaharski.
I don't know where this nickname came from. I didn't see it on a card or anything.
To it. And to help work our way through and making sure that the data is available across the DCO enterprise, across the enterprise at large. Directed, in that we have to be after an operational objective. Hey, what are we trying to get out of this? There's bunches and piles of data all over the place. It's got to be directed in a way that Dave McCarthy and crew have getting after some operational objectives given to him by the director. The J2 will help inform us. He'll threat inform that. So he's going to overlay some threat data. He's going to take battlefield information that we feed him and turn that into intelligence for us. And then finally, the PO teams can help implement that so that we, as a consumer, can leverage it to greatest extent. So you have to work that. All the pieces have to come together through rocky marriages to get us to a place where we can operate more effectively. And I think that's really, really important for us, is to keep that going and realize that the other component pieces of the organization are a part of our success. Despite Steve's habits, I'm still going to have him on the team. We're not in divorce court yet. There's been some close calls.
We'll get counseling together before we do that.
Right.
No, but you're right. And if you look at this panel, I mean, that's what we have together, right? So we have, Dave, especially end user community, of a lot of data that he receives. His cyber analysts are having to use that. And then we, with Daryl getting a lot of that as well. And then you have the data scientists, the Chief Data Officer, where we're actually putting the rules around it and making them clean his room and telling them how they should be using the data. And then we got J2 over here, who's also doing that higher level of intelligence on top of it, right? So Daryl, I mean, beautiful point right there with us all having to work together and being able to have that understanding and flexibility depending on the core requirement or problem statement that data can help solve. So, okay. With that, I think we can open the floor for questions. Is that mic hot? Awesome. Any questions from the audience?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. This question's for Romeen. That data readiness score you were talking about, what are the criteria for that? What data elements are incorporated in that, and how do you aggregate that into a score? What does that look like?
You didn't hold back on the hard question, did you?
Nope.
So the data readiness score is it contains key metrics that we deem to be important when trying to decide if your new technology that the new capability that you're implementing in DISA has put in enough consideration around the data. So in terms of the specifics, we can have conversation after that as to what it is. But the main intent is to make sure that data is a part of all new capabilities moving forward, and the data consideration was given at the initial inception or creation of said, before the technology is even passed and approved by the Chief Engineering panel.
Okay, yeah, I would be very interested in hearing more details on that. I'd kind of like to incorporate something like that in my own cyber contract as something that would be useful.
Okay, we'll definitely have a sidebar after we get off
Sounds
stage.
good, thank you, sir.
Yeah, it talks about, looking at the DoD policies from the DoD CDAO office, policies that we've implemented here within DISA, and then also just core data requirements of, is it visible, is it accessible, is the metadata requirements tagging standards, implemented. It's things like that we work with the program offices so that data layer has the attention that frankly, it really hasn't had, in a lot of in the previous years.
This will probably work. Okay, I'm not as tall as I thought. So, from data tagging and data governance that's been talked about today, I'm just curious how you feel that will bring, if it will add visibility to the insider threat mission space, or how that will help that mission space, if at all.
Sure. So I can't necessarily talk specifically for the mission space, as in what tags will do what. It's not my domain. But in general, right, so data tagging is important, right? So for that mission space, there's going to be unique tags for process. So one system collects or receives the information, they tag it, and that is read by or retrieved or received by another system, right? So the idea is to standardize that as much as possible, but there's going to be differences in those tags in accordance to whatever the systems are, right? So that's the first thing. And there's also more advanced things, like if you're doing some sort of predictions or something like that, tagging what model predicted what. So when you go and you reconcile everything, you don't just have predictions and with no context. So that can improve operations, right? But there's the process and operational tags, and then there's also the governance tags, which are more standard across domains. And that's more what the OCDO is working with now, is those more standard, higher level tags, if you will.
Dave, did you have a comment to that, to the question?
No.
So
I saw you reaching for the mic. I didn't want you to not have your chance. But go ahead.
So from a threat perspective, how do we use data to understand behavior? So I mean, we got users all over the networks. I'm mostly focused on looking on the outside and what's trying to come in, but still, a threat is a threat. And doing DCO. So the first thing I got to use the data to normalize. Use the data to understand what is normal behavior for either an individual or for a staff section or a group. And then being able to look at that data where it's been, again, normalized and the metadata tagging's put into it, that we can better address, anomalous behavior. Or we can better address when things aren't starting to look right. Because most of the insider threats, for most of them, if they're good at what they do, or they're good at what they are, they stay below that radar. So is how do we start utilizing all these data sets we have to be able to get better defined and refined understanding of our networks and our users' behavior to basically stay after that insider threat.
Okay. Anything else? Do you really have a question? Okay.
I think I am short. Okay. So this is to the whole group, but I'd be interested in understanding what you guys see as your North Star for operationalizing data. So is that going to be, are you looking at what the field offices are doing? Are you looking at what you're directed to be doing? What do you use as your North Star?
I think for me, the North Star, as I'm starting to really dive into this for DISA as a new J2, is the operational data. The IC data is, we've already been getting that for years. Mm-hmm. But for me, the North Star, as I'm looking at it, is how do I take everything that Dave sees, and I said this earlier, and what Daryl sees, and how do I operationalize that? How do I turn all that network data, enriching it with some of the stuff from the IC, but how do I really turn it into actual intelligence? How do we just take normal everyday, network data that we think is just normal operations, but really being able to refine that and really pull out those threats from that they're living off the land. They're in our networks. We just can't see it. So how do we better use our data to help pull out, those threats that are living off the land?
I'd say to just taking the highest level requirements, for example, data strategy, and working down, right? So the North Star would obviously be able to deliver all the capabilities that are mentioned or alluded to in the strategy as close or to surpass what we are trying to accomplish. I think that's the North Star with the OCDO, is delivering on the strategy that we lay out.
So as the branch chief, I have a number of North Stars, right? So first things first is ethical AI is built on top of good data quality. Mm-hmm. So my first North Star is to make sure that we got good quality data within DISA, right? So that's implementing ways to measure quality and operationalize that quality, right? The second North Star I have is to make data discoverable, right? The data may be useful, but is the data visible to the right people, and can they get insights off it? So visibility of data, putting that data lineage, showing the transformation as it came down the pipeline. And then another North Star I have is on top of is to make sure that we write good policies that deliver capabilities that are relevant to the warfighter, right? So we can't put policies out there that limit the creative nature that we need to operate in to make sure that we're delivering the capabilities that a warfighter needs. So that's another North Star I have. One of the other North Stars, as I said, there's a number, right? I am the chief of the data management branch, so my fingers are in lots and lots of pots. I'm also one of the teams within my branch is the Center of Excellence, and that team, their efforts are about finding useful insights within different data sets within DISA organizations, and then allowing them to visualize and digitize those. And the whole point of that effort is to make sure that we are finding useful insights and then bringing that to the powers that be so they can make the decisions. So we have to so my North Star there is to make sure that I have a team helping DISA to understand how to normalize, visualize, and digitize their data, and then be able to pull insights out of it, right? So that's just one. And I think that's enough stars for now, right? So I'll turn over to the other team, but I have a few.
I'll present two, I think. First, we need... So first, let me preface this with, I'm a consumer. I don't set policy. I have requirements, but that doesn't mean they're satisfied. So, but what we need to do is, I think the first thing would be a single pane of glass where we could analyze and correlate all of our data, our network security relevant data, like I said, from tier 0 all the way to tier 1 in one data lake that we can just punch it in and see what we see. The other thing that we need where I work quite often is I need access to a lot of other people's data, and it's got to be right. So for instance, asset management, right, a configuration management database, and kind of like a much lower level example, like these guys, they like kind of high level examples, and I think that's why I didn't comment on yours. Mine's like so down in the weeds. And but if Richard comes to me and says, hey, there's if you heard about this whatever threat to Linux-based network edge devices that's emerging, how many do we have in the network, and are they forward-facing? Perfectly reasonable question. You'd think I'd be able to go to one place, type that in, and say 52. And, it's not quite that simple where we work. But that's what I would like to see. I would like to see that level of, be able to just we got network data we gotta work with. We got asset and vulnerability data we need to work with. We need to be able to correlate across to know where in order to really understand our vulnerabilities and our exposures and our compensating controls, which are all things that he feeds, right? He feeds the threat, which marries with that. We need all that asset data to do that. That's not really based on the packets that are flowing north to south. And then, of course, we need that mountain of data that is flowing. And to Daryl's point, I was going to make is he talked about the 270 days, whatever the number is, but it's a long time. And I can give another concrete example that's way down in the weeds. But what's the first step in incident response, right? It's the scope. So just because you discovered this one thing, well, heck, they might have gone like all over the place and set themselves up nicely. And if you can't go back and look, now that you've discovered the initial breadcrumb and follow that left and right, well, you're blind to that. So no biggie that you, I mean, could be from the attacker's perspective, no biggie that you closed the initial gap. So that's why retention, storage, and what we store needs to be, like I talked about those visibility charts, same line of thinking, right? That's why we need to have it. And that's why, and he's like, geez, nobody's looked at it in 9 months. Obviously they don't use it. Well, it's not important till you need it, and then it's really important. So that's kind of, so I would say, you know, we need access to accurate data across the agency, and who knows what we're going to need and when we're going to need it. And then we need all that network data. It needs to be collected and stored in a fashion where we can analyze it to scope broadly across the agency to know if things are related or not. I hope that answered your question.
You're killing me, Dave. Yeah, so I want to live in a data converged environment. Okay, as Dave has talked about, he talked about different domains of data. As we work, all you have to do is read the newspaper. The trend is living off the land. So the security relevant data that I've been working really, really hard to get in the seam and correlated is becoming less valuable over time, because my adversary knows that, and he knows I'm working really hard on it, so he's going somewhere else. And that somewhere else is in the network and living off the land of all the devices that are there. That data has to get into in a converged environment, in an integrated data architecture that allows me to sift through it whenever I need to find what's in there. And I may not know that question today, which makes it really hard for my data scientist friend to work on. Because I'm not sure what my question I'm going to ask the data tomorrow. But that's what defines what I collect, because it's based on questions I'm going to ask. And some of those I know, and some of them are in the future, and I don't know. So you make an educated guess as to how you do that, and you bring the network operations data together in a pile, and you bring the DCO data from the boundary in a pile, you bring CSSP data from deployed in IDSs, and now, for me, all roads lead to the endpoint. All roads lead to the endpoint, and you can pick a tool that you want to put in the endpoint. Endgame, MD, pick a tool. So in 1952, the FBI caught up with a guy named Willie Sutton. They caught up with Willie, they had him in a room, they had the lights on him, shining down. As Willie, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Why is Daryl driving to the endpoint? Because that's where the key data is. And he's got to marry that with everything else in a converged data environment to stay a step ahead of the bad guys. And that's where I want to be. And the agency's doing some things to get there. They're driving the number of Splunks we have spread all over the empire. They're trying to drive that down. We have an integrated data architecture we're feeding things into. I want to feed that initiative and continue to participate in it and drive us to this converged environment where I don't have to clean my office, can stay dirty and messy, but we get to a better place. Okay?
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Look at us.
No.
Go ahead, Phil. We got 2 minutes, Phil.
Okay, I'll make it real quick, right? Assuming you have the infinite wisdom, what do you think about the future of machine learning to help your business going forward in the next 5 or 10 years? I mean, you heard about this on on the media, on your technical journals, right? On a real case. What do you think?
It's a double-edged sword. It's going to help us, and it's going to help the adversary. And it's going to... So I was on another panel yesterday, and we have so much data. At a certain point, artificial intelligence or generated by artificial intelligence is going to make decisions that we can't even understand how those decisions were made because it doesn't think like us, right? It learns. It's going to be the same for the adversary. When they have IA-enabled attacks and malware that comes at us, I think personally, this is not anybody's official position, it's going to take another artificial intelligence to detect that. If it can analyze our network and it can develop its own novel exploits that are effectively 0 days, it's going to take a similar capability on the defensive side to detect that and in place countermeasures. So, yeah, I mean, right? It's a double-edged sword. It's gonna. The person that knows how to wield that tool best is going to be the winner. I don't think IAs are not going to replace humans, but humans that know how to wield IA are going to replace humans who don't know how to wield IA. Or AI. I'm stuck in information assurance for some reason. But artificial intelligence, the humans that can use the artificial intelligence are going to replace the ones that can't. But it's going to be sophisticated, and all this data is what's going to act on, and it's going to be an asset and a threat.
So, you're already there. You're already there.
Yeah.
So if we're waiting for 5 years, it's all going to be over crying by then. That's playing out in real time in Europe as we speak. It's going on, and that's all open source. You can go find it. So we need to grab a hold of that and embrace it, and be the AI-enabled defenders that Dave's talking about yesterday, because our adversaries know where it is. You can go on the web and download it and bring it to bear on the problem set today. Anybody in here could do that, and our bad guys are better than that. They're nation state sponsored. They're in it. So we've got to get caught up and do that and leverage it to our advantage. And we need to do it yesterday across the spectrum of tools, across the spectrum from SIEMs to data collecting to analysts to lakes. To help with the data problem that Steve and I are arguing about. I need some help with that, but I'm not going to clean my room. I'm not going to clean my room.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you. All right, guys. With that, thank you for showing up. Thank you to our panelists. Great session. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.